My first encounter
Yeah.
with the reality of my skin color and understanding what it means to be black and living in South Africa. My first encounter with that was when I was in grade 9 and we went to a school trip at the Apartheid Museum.
Welcome to Young and Proud Educators, KKG, and we're back at it. Njabulo, welcome to Young Proud Educators. We're super excited to have you. We're super excited to learn from you. It's been a while trying to get you here, SMSs, WhatsApp, Facebook, but finally you are here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. I think the work you're doing is so commendable, giving teachers an opportunity and a platform on which they can, voice out what they're experiencing and what they're going through. It's needed, very much needed, because in the education space, a lot is going on right now. And there's a need for the education space to receive a voice in which they'll be able to say how they're feeling and what needs to be done
Yeah.
about their daily experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate people like you who are doing amazing things in teaching, and I'm willing to talk about them and share the experiences with everybody. But before we kick off, we usually ask people to tell us about themselves, the backgrounds, where they're coming from, because we believe as people, personally on my own, I believe that there's power in history, there's power in our stories, there's power in where we coming from. Because my story um, um, will be always going to be like someone else in the future, and someone will learn from that story in 50 years time. So when we do that, we teach the next generation. So we like to know your story, brother Njabulo. I don't
Sure.
know.
So
I
my
don't know.
story. Okay, let me start off my story this. My surname is Mkhize,
Yeah.
but it's spelled Mkize. It's missing an H.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
I
supposed to be
I was
MK.
wondering. I was wondering.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Mkhize, and oh, that H represents a
Okay.
lot to me personally, and a lot to my family. So, my grandfather, my dad's dad, my grandfather was from KZN,
Mm,
specifically an area called Ntunzini,
sure.
and he came to Johannesburg illegally, according to the apartheid system. Illegally, in the sense that he did not have any work permit or documentation that would allow him to live and work in Johannesburg. And the reason why he came to Johannesburg is because there was a lot of um, bad infighting that was going on in his home area. So him staying there would have put his life in danger, and also, I guess, lack of opportunities in the area where he was living. So he came to Johannesburg seeking opportunities, and basically got involved in the political space, got involved with a whole lot of different things that would be regarded according to the apartheid system as a crime,
Yeah.
because you're not allowed to be there.
Mm,
You understand?
I understand.
And basically, altercations with police officers, altercations with people who'd be wanting to check his documentation, his dom pass, and checking whether he's got work permit and all of
Yeah.
that. And the story goes that he became a little bit of a Robin Hood, stealing from the rich to give to the poor, you know.
Uh,
And so, in the process of it, anyway, he met my grandmother, had my dad and his elder brother, and basically, eventually, the law caught up to him, and he landed up in prison. and was given a life sentence
Mm.
and was hung. So that's the beginning of the Mkhize story, according to the nearest generation to me.
Yeah.
And he was hung. He was basically, my dad only had, I think, if in his lifetime, two interactions with his father. So he only literally met his father, I think, twice, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
And the last time he met him was just before he was going to be hanged. So that's how the story goes. So my dad and his brother are brought up by their mom as a single mom, bringing up two boys who carry the lineage of the surname Mkhize.
Yeah.
And because there was a lot of infighting and a lot of fighting going on in the Mkhize side of the family, they never actually had any links to the Mkhize side of the family. So they were never able to go back to KZN and link up to the family M2Z. So till this day, I've got absolutely no links to that family.
Yeah.
Beyond the surname, I've got no links. I've got no relative I can turn to and say that's my dad's uh, side of the family. Um, but however, I carry the surname and with a lot of pride, and I love the link it gives me to the history of the country itself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my dad has said many a times, let's just go to Home Affairs and sort out the surname, put the H back in. And I've been very reluctant to do so because to me that H represents more than just an alphabet. To me, that H, we can put back the H in the surname and try and fix it, but that doesn't bring back the heritage we lost. It does not bring back the inheritance that was lost. It does not bring back the life that was taken. You know, so you correct the spelling error that was intentionally done by the apartheid era. Because if you look at original
Mm.
letters that my grandfather wrote while he was in prison, those original letters that my grandfather wrote while he was in prison, he wrote it with an H, but it was intentionally misspelled.
Yeah.
So, and under the current government, if you want to fix it, you have to pay. And I'm not willing to pay, even if they say it's 1 cent. I'm not willing to pay even 1 cent to fix it because I feel as if it was never my error, and therefore I should not hold the responsibility to pay for it.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning of my story.
Mm.
And then I'm born and bred in Soweto. All I know is life in Soweto. I have no links at all to life in
KZN.
KZN or anywhere else, both from my mom's side as well as my dad's side of the family. My mom's side of the family comes from Swaziland, but we also grew up in Soweto. And I guess all the history blends on both sides of my family as a history in which we lost our inheritance, we lost our heritage, we lost links back to family, and then a new life was created
Straight up.
in Soweto. And from my dad's side of the family, my dad's mother, uh, her mom, who passed on earlier this year, passed on at the age of 103, going towards 104,
That's
and
amazing.
was living. So I've got a
That's a complete
generational
life.
history in Soweto. Yeah, I've got a
Wow.
very long generational history in Soweto. So for me, Soweto is home. And when people ask me where's home, I'm like, guys, I don't know what you're talking about. For me, Soweto's home. That's all I know. And I'm sure you'll understand the concept. In South Africa, everyone's supposed to have a home, which
Which is a
is in the
village.
country, and then you're
Yeah.
supposed to have a home where you go ka December, ka the holiday, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to my home, Komahayeng. I don't
Yeah.
have that. I
Yeah.
don't have that. And yo, I'm not saying that with pride. At the same time, I'm saying it with a lot of pain.
Sure.
Not having that has been painful for me. Very painful for me. I've missed out on a lot that uh, links me to who I am. To the extent that I even feel as if I don't even speak Zulu properly because I've never had links back to the source of the language that I'm supposed to speak. Yeah, that's who I am.
Wow. I'm listening at you and I'm like, this man, he goes back and then he paints his family tree just like that with ease. And some of us are struggling to do that, but like to be honest, I struggle to do that. I can only go 2 generations back and I'm lost. but it's amazing on how you go back history and just paint a picture where you coming from.
Yeah, can I
Is
tell you?
is this intentional to say, you know what, I want to know where I'm coming from, or was it just
It's
exposed to
very
it since your grandma was 103? You just
yeah.
passed on now.
It's very intentional
Okay.
because my first encounter
Yeah.
with the reality of my skin color and understanding what it means to be black and living in South Africa. My first encounter with that was when I was in grade 9 and we went to a school trip at the Apartheid Museum.
Yeah.
And like most black families, I grew up in a family where the family history has been hidden. They don't openly talk about the background of our family and the history of the family. It's not that my parents or my relatives, my grandparents and my uncles would openly speak about the history. Not necessarily. They would say certain things and you'd pick up on bits and pieces of the story, but you wouldn't outright get the full story.
Yeah.
So basically, here I am, grade 9. We visit the Apartheid Museum. And when we visit the Apartheid Museum, there's a room in which there's about 120 nooses that hang from the ceiling of the Apartheid Museum. I walked into that room with the background knowledge already that my grandfather was hung. But before walking into that room, the reality of him having been hung was was not really as skin deep to me as it is now. Actually, not even skin deep. I think it's bone marrow deep now,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But back then, it was something I heard and it hadn't hit me. I walked into that room and cold chills ran down my spine. I
I can
literally
imagine.
felt as if I've literally stepped into a moment in which the past has become my present reality.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I literally broke down. For the rest of the trip, I wasn't okay. And nobody could see it. My teachers did not see it. My peers did, my friends did not see it. Nobody could see the pain I was feeling in that moment, where history does not become history anymore, where history becomes
Yeah.
my current present reality. And as a young kid in grade 9, in all honesty, I didn't know how to deal with it. I look back now and still feel the same pain and still
Yeah.
ask myself, how did I actually survive that? Because it could have destroyed me.
Yeah.
In all honesty, it could have destroyed me because from that specific moment, it hit me so hard that I developed an obsession with history. I literally turned into someone who became obsessed with history. Anything that talks about history I'd want to know about. But this is the one thing that I realized. If I'd be reading history, that is history of another country, um, of another people who it would hit me. I would feel the pain related to it, but it would not necessarily be an empathy. It would be a sympathy, where I just feel shame and something happened to these people.
Yeah.
But whenever I'd come across South African history, it would be personal. So
It's
I'd
home.
sit in the history class. When I got to grade 10, I chose history as one of my main subjects. And I'd sit in class and feel depressed when we get to the history section, which is South African history. And the teacher would be so surprised why, even in the way I'd write my essays,
Yeah.
she'd say to me, "You're not putting out your argument properly." And I'd say to her, "You don't understand that to me, this is not just a history paper.
This is
I'm,
personal.
I'm, I'm writing something that is about us
Yeah.
as a people, you
Yeah.
know." And so eventually through the years, I grappled with the history, grappled with myself, and in the process tried to drain the story out of my parents,
Yeah.
especially my father. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time questioning him and trying to get him to tell me more and more about the history. But in the process of so doing, I'd have to play because every time I'd ask questions, I'd realize that the more I ask him questions, the more I dig into his painful wounds as well.
Yeah.
And My grandmother, on the other hand, she was a closed book. She did not even want to talk about it because for her, the pain was still real.
Yeah.
It was so real that she had letters from her husband that she did not want to pass on to anyone else. She held on to those letters. Those letters, I'm saying letters that were more than 40 years old. My grandmother, when I say my grandmother, I'm talking my dad's mother,
Yeah.
Ukoko Kize. We used to call her Koko Kize. She passed on approximately, it's been about 3 weeks back now.
Yeah.
And until the
Condolences
last day, he held on to
to the
letters
letters.
that were written about 60 years or more back. Yeah.
Wow. That's deep. That's deep. You know, you touched on a very important issue to say our black families, they don't share, they don't speak about what happened. They keep quiet. So I'm wondering what was the impact of their silence in your journey? Because now you wanted to know answers. You wanted all you could hear in the space. That one will say that, but not complete. Like puzzles were all over the place. All that you needed to do was to put the puzzle together so you can have a complete story. And nobody said anything. What was the impact of that silence?
Yeah, the impact of the silence is that it splits up into many areas of your life, if I could say. First of all, I'd say anger.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
I have grown up and had a lot of anger.
Yeah.
Anger, which, if I were to use a term, uh, which I recently, about maybe a year or two ago, discovered the term, talking about collective trauma as well as
Yeah.
transgenerational trauma. That anger and tension that is in you, and you just, in all honesty, don't even know why you're so angry.
Yeah.
You've got the anger, but you don't have the reason for the anger in you. In your mind, you can't link it.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the link into it, and so for me, it was anger, and that anger turned me into someone who was very judgmental. Judgmental in the sense that, for me, in all honesty, until maybe the last 5 6 years ago, whenever I'd see a white person, in my head, it was directly susceptible and linked to oppressor.
Yeah.
I did not ever want or find myself thinking of a white person who would be on my side, And I think in the journey of that anger, it also went and spilled over into an identity hunger, a hunger to find out who am I,
Sure.
And in the process of trying to find out who am I, um, you begin to create an identity for yourself.
Yeah.
And in the process of creating an identity for yourself, don't think that you're not being judged. There's people standing on the sidelines and checking whether you fit in, you know. So, like for example, being a Mkhize, you walk to anyone, and the first thing they ask you is, "Mfana wam, what iithakazelo zakho zithini?" You know, you
Mm.
must know all the clan names and everything, but at that moment, they're not asking you, "What did your family lose, and why don't you know this information?"
Yeah.
So I would make sure that I learn those things very quickly so that I can fit and be accepted.
Amazing.
But the reality of it is, as a kid, you find that you don't fit in even amongst your own people because it feels as if this kid is he behaves too white for our liking,
Yeah.
especially since our parents would take us to schools that are multiracial schools, and then we'd have English as our first
Yeah.
language, and having Afrikaans as the second language. You don't get an opportunity to learn your home language in school, and that literally just kept building up more and more things that are hitting hard on our identity. So I'd say in the process of that, what happens is that, now, mind you, our parents were looking for the best for us.
Yeah.
In their mind, taking you to that type of a school is because they didn't have an opportunity because of Bantu education and all of that. And then it's like, okay, here's an opportunity in which our child can get what we didn't get. you know. But in the process of that, not realizing how it will hit hard on you, you will lose out on the values and cultural standards and norms that are part of your language. You know, when I say values in your own language, I'm talking things like sayings, proverbs in your language. Being able to identify with the music, being
Sure.
able to identify with the way in which people do things, being able to identify with even the background of your own people.
Yeah.
So we had to create our own identity, basically, walking around and trying to fit in wherever you are. But you find that you never totally fit in. Then you basically termed this generation that is called born free. And you don't feel free, but you called born free. You tagged on with this thing, but you don't feel that freedom.
Yeah.
And that's the journey we entered into. Yeah.
We're born free, but we're not free. It's just a term to separate the generations.
Yeah.
Listening to you, I hear you went through a lot, finding who you are, couldn't find that information was hidden from you. You tried to put the puzzles together. It was a struggle, and now you create your own identity, and now you're judged for that. You're not accepted by your own people. At the moment, what's the identity that you're running with?
Sure. I
It's
think for me, interestingly, I eventually reached the point where I didn't care anymore.
yeah,
I didn't care anymore. And I reached the point where I was like, I'll be the best version of who I am.
yeah,
Because, in all honesty, everything else is taken.
sure,
There's no one else who's like me. There's no one else who shares my story, my history. And if they are out there, we are very few. So I will not try and pretend as if I'm from KZN. Yes, I'll try and learn my home language and know it as well as I possibly can, but I will not try and pretend as if I'm from there. I will not try and fight to fit in into anywhere. I mean, when I got to varsity, I once sparked off a humongous debate in class. So we
yeah,
were asked, "What is your home language?" So I stood up in class and I said, I'm bilingual. My home language is both English and Zulu."
yeah.
And I was told, no, no,
You
you
can,
cannot say
you can,
that. They actually the term used was, "What is your mother tongue?" So I said to them, my mother tongue is both English and Zulu. I'm
yeah,
bilingual. And
yeah.
they were arguing with me. No, that is impossible. I said to them, wait, let me give you the reason why I'm saying this. I
Bilingual.
did not learn English from school. I learned English from home. My mother taught me English. By the time I walked into the gates of any school, I was fluent
Yeah,
in both Zulu and English. I knew them from a home background. So, in other words, my mom taught me both languages. So, it's my mother tongue. And it was a humongous
it's like
they would
no,
not
it's not
accept.
possible.
Not
It's
even
not
the
possible.
lecturer would accept that.
Yeah.
Not even the lecturer wanted to accept it. And I was like, no, I am claiming this. I don't care. Don't look at the skin color. I speak the Queen's English and I speak it proper. I speak it good.
And I'm from Soweto.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm from Soweto, and man, look, I am claiming it. I speak this language, and I spoke this language from like the age of 2. So you can't say anything.
We're gonna go into education or into schools. That will be part of it. But just a step back. Um, from just last one question from your grandfather's history and what you went through. Have you healed,
No,
or you still in the process?
look, I think healing is a process in itself,
Yeah,
and one thing in South Africa that hinders the healing process
yeah,
is that the reparations have not been fulfilled. In other words, when I say reparations, I'm linking back to the Truth and Reconciliation
sure.
Council, that commission that was was not a full-on process. Basically, they attempted to fix about 52 years of apartheid, coupled with about 400 years of slavery
Yeah.
in approximately 3.5 to about 8 years. And the recommendations that were made for a wealth tax, for such things as having reparations for certain people who had lost.
Yeah.
We received a whole truth. If you
Sure.
can look at the whole truth, it had a very big hole in it. It was missing a lot of truth. And so if you have a partial truth, you will have a partial reconciliation. You know, and so the healing process is one in which in South Africa, including me, not just South Africa and South Africa alone,
Yeah.
including myself in the statement, we have been playing uh, the ignorance card, which
Yeah.
is uh, ignore your pain and focus on the future. And that any wound that is ignored after some time becomes septic and it begins to run with pus and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So for me personally, when I realized the amount of anger that I carried, I opted to rather take a path that would start to give me a healing process, a
Yeah.
path in which I began to speak about my family history a lot more. That's why you were able to get my family history so easily out of me, because I started speaking about it a lot more because I believe in speaking about it, I relieve myself of the anger and the pain that I carry. In the process of it, I began writing a book with my dad.
Yeah.
It's been taking a couple of years for us to write it because he writes and then has to stop because after he has written for a while, the pain of it hits him so hard that he needs a break for another couple of months. My dad and I have done a radio interview
Sure.
before, also related to our story, and that was around the same time period as Fees Must Fall, where I actually directly noticed that I was behaving in a way that was directly linked to the past and the history. During a protest like Fees Must Fall, we'd be singing the same songs, we'd
Yeah.
be behaving in the similar way,
Similar.
and my dad is the June 16 generation. So you find that the behavior is
Ah.
passed on. And my dad didn't even want me to be part of those protests. And when I told him I was going to be part of it, he had a fear in him about me being part of it. And the reason why he had a fear about it is because he suffered a lot from what happened to him. Sorry, I'm getting into another history of my family that links
That's
directly to my
perfect.
dad.
That's perfect. It's part of
Okay, can I
healing.
go into it?
It's part of healing.
So around June 16, 1976,
Yeah.
my dad was a young man living in Soweto, and at that particular point, there was what they called the third force, which was Zulu men from the hostels, or Stella, and they were working hand in hand with the government.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyone who was a student at that particular point, if they would come across them, would be a target. And so there's a point at which my dad was sent to the shop around the time period of June 16, the uprisings. He was sent to the shop, and when he was on his way coming back from the shop, there was a group of Zulu men from the hostel who were
Yeah.
basically putting in discipline on these rowdy students who were trying to overthrow the government. So he was hit with a knobgear over the head, and typical black family didn't take him to the doctor, just put rub, send the boy to sleep. And then, so many years later, when he was around his 50s, he had internal bleeding right there where he was hit. And the doctors tried to inquire, what's the issue? Did you have a car accident? Did you have an issue? He could not recall. And then it dawned to him, hey, about 30 something years back
Wow.
almost, I got hit over the head with a knobkerrie. And being it that he was going into his 50s, the veins in his brain basically had started to thin out. So then he had that blood. Basically, this is the brain. The
Yeah.
blood was filling up on the one side so much that the brain was squashing against the other side like that. And they had to drill into his skull, drain the blood out. It affected him a whole lot in terms of ability to continue working as he usually would, to apply himself. My dad is extremely smart, even though he's doesn't have degreed education, but
Yeah.
extremely smart. He does a lot of in terms of business related stuff. In other words, trying to work with projects and fundraising for them and all of that. But it really stifled him a whole
Yeah.
lot because
Yeah.
after that operation, you can't spend as many hours doing hard work because
Yeah.
then he ends
I
up
can
with
imagine.
a critical headache and all of that, you know. But yeah, so basically, when I was getting now involved in the fees must fall, the background that he personally had was giving him a fear for what would happen to me, you know. And I mean, going into fees must fall for me was a crazy experience because there's a moment at which, for example, I was at Wits University living at Res, and
Yeah.
I'm walking there, hands raised, they're shooting rubber bullets at us. And when I come close by to the kwela kwela, I'm using an old term,
Yeah.
that hip, yeah, the kwela kwela. I come as I'm walking past it. What I see inside is a bunch of very buff white guys with their ammunition shooting towards us black students. And in my head, and by the way, these guys are much older than we were. In my head, what hits me is that, is it the same apartheid police who have just changed their uniform and the color of their car? Instead of a yellow kwela kwela, it's blue and white, and the uniform is now a South African democracy police uniform. And that hit me so hard because it related directly to
Exactly.
me and directly to my past, you know. So, yeah, like, am I over it? Have I healed? I'm in the process of healing. I am in the process of healing, and it's a daily work. Some days I make more progress than others. Some days I take 2 steps back, some days I take 3 steps forward. So days differ. But I think I've become better when it comes to the anger. I'm not as angry, or rather, let me say, I know how to control the anger better.
Yeah.
It's there, I just control it. Yeah.
And it's always better when you have someone to support you. Like when you married, have the family. Women play that extremely important role in our lives.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Especially in terms of mental health.
yeah,
That's one topic that we don't talk about enough, especially in the black community.
sure.
Um, that is where, as a young man, as growing up in the South Africa, in which you've got all sorts of abuse, family related violence, gender based violence, you find that we're looking at the effect that gender based violence has, and we're looking at what's happening in the home, and this man is beating up his wife and all of that. We don't look at the history. We don't look at the history of trauma. We don't look at the history of anger,
Yeah.
the history that has been, passed on, the history of what oppression can do to a person,
Yeah.
turn a gentleman into a monster, you know. And I'm not trying to give an excuse for those people, because
I
I don't
understand.
think there's anything that we can give it as an excuse for being a violent human
Yeah.
being, especially in terms of violence expressed on people who cannot even fight for themselves. But I'd say the mental health issue is the one that I want to touch on a lot, and say that the healing process
Yeah.
has been very important for me personally, because I want to keep my sanity in check constantly.